Robert De Niro returned to the mob movie genre this year, and barely anybody knows it. So, is that because the movie sucks, or is it because it's an underrated gem that just did not get the support it needed from studios and audiences alike? Well, let's dive into the Alto Nights, and I will let you know my thoughts. Hello, welcome to the channel. My name is Sean Morgan, and I love movies. I was interested in the Alto Nights because Robert De Niro is simply one of the greatest actors to ever do it, despite some of his late career roles being less than stellar. That being said, he can still turn in all time performances, so he remains notable for good reason. I think his turn in Killers of the Flower Moon, for example, is maybe the best supporting performance of that entire year. I would not have been upset at all had he won the Oscar instead of Robert Downey Jr. for Oppenheimer. No offense to Iron Man, who is also deserving, of course. If I could give the award to multiple people every year, I probably would. I digress. Barry Levinson's The Alto Nights is a film that arrives with weighty expectations and an even weightier performance challenge. Robert De Niro, who is in his 80s, plays both of the film's central characters. These men, Frank Costello and Vito Genovese, were real life mob titans whose power struggle in mid century New York redefined the American mafia. For De Niro, portraying each man with distinct identity and lived in nuance is not just merely an acting exercise, it's a core mechanism of the film's dramatic tension, and that absolutely needs to work, or else the film will fall apart completely. So while De Niro does deliver a fascinating double performance and pulls that portion of the project off, the film itself never quite ascends beyond its genre tropes, in my opinion. And there's the caveat that its release strategy by Warner Brothers sparked a little bit of controversy, but the story of the film orbits around the rivalry between Costello and Genovese, particularly the events that led to the attempted assassination of Costello in 1957 and the subsequent reorganization of the crime families in New York at the time. Barry Levinson, working from a script by Nicholas Pileggi, tries to channel the same energy that once made films like Goodfellas and Casino genre-defining works. Where those films, however, pulsed with momentum and visceral clarity, The Alto Nights meanders a little bit in comparison. There are compelling moments, yes, but they're drowned in a lot of voiceover, a lot of expositional flashbacks, and a narrative structure that never quite finds its footing. This is a film that wants to be energetic, but often ends up feeling inert or just dragged out a teeny bit. Still, De Niro's twin performances are remarkable enough to merit attention. As Frank Costello, he plays this quiet strategist. He's refined, he's very politically connected, this guy. He's composed in both his manner and his dress. Costello's the type of mob boss who would rather buy influence than demand it in threatening ways. You know, he walks his dog in this nice tailored coat. He exudes quiet control. He manages his empire like a corporate executive rather than a street level thug. De Niro's performance here is subdued and it's full of these calculated pauses, these narrowed gazes. His voice is lower, his voice is more deliberate, and even when he's navigating dangerous situations, there's this kind of weary elegance to the way this character holds himself. And in stark contrast, De Niro's Vito Genovese is brash, paranoid, and quite violent. Genovese doesn't want to just make deals, he wants domination. Here, De Niro leans into physical transformation with this character. Genovese moves with restlessness. He often erupts into fits of rage. De Niro's vocal timbre is sharper here. His cadence is more erratic, and even in, you know, costume and makeup, it's a very different character. Despite some critics noting that the prosthetics on this particular character are distracting, I thought the contrast here, I thought the effect of that totally worked for me. It's not just that De Niro plays two roles, right? It's that he's embodying in the story these two opposing philosophies of power, two visions of masculinity within the crime world. So watching them collide, these two De Niro guys, these two De Niro characters, watching them come at odds is at times pretty electrifying and pretty interesting. However, I could see why some people might think that the film overall does not fully capitalize on the dramatic potential of this kind of dual performance. Because both characters are played by the same actor, the film can't always showcase them having direct confrontation. There are a few of those scenes where they are opposite one another in the frame, but we're instead mostly given alternating character studies, and the result is a film that can feel lopsided or bloated a little bit. Some critics and audience members have noted that the choice to have De Niro play both roles ultimately detracts from the tension for them personally, turning what could have been a dynamic narrative into kind of just a stunt that calls attention to itself or insists upon itself, to borrow phrasing from Peter Griffin. I thought the dual performance worked and did not distract, but I'm biased in favor of De Niro, and I always will be. Um, I will say another strength is that the film's period detail is often quite good, or at least seems accurate to my untrained eye. Cinematographer Dante Spinati brings the era to life with a dusty sort of glow. 1950s New York is rendered in warm golds and bruised grays. The Appalachian Meeting, an infamous real world, gathering of mob bosses that turned into a farce after police intervention, is one of the film's standout sequences too. Here, Levinson captures the sort of paranoia and disarray of organized crime on the verge of collapse. In moments like these, you see the outline of the more powerful film that the Alto Knights could have been. Unfortunately, though, the film's not quite up to snuff when you compare it to things in the genre. And also, unfortunately, the film's troubled release may eclipse some of the, good things that it has going for it. The film was backed personally by Warner Brothers CEO David Zaslav, who I am not quite a fan of, which I make no secret about. The Alto Knights was greenlit and released wide in theaters at a time when many Warner Brothers projects have either been shelved, dumped into streaming, or subject to tax write-offs. For example, titles like the completed Batgirl and Coyote vs. Acme were famously shelved despite having strong internal buzz or fan interest. I believe Coyote vs. Acme has been saved by Ketchup Entertainment. I'm looking forward to seeing that film when it comes out. Batgirl, not so lucky. But that the Alto Knights, with its kind of with its modest box office prospects, with a niche demographic appeal, the fact that it received such a wide theatrical push felt to many in the industry and many observers like myself like favoritism. The marketing campaign was minimal. Audience targeting leaned heavily toward older viewers. Like I said, those critics, those industry watchers, they questioned the logic of such a rollout, myself included. This is a film geared towards an aging demographic with little promotional support and no clear award season strategy, yet it occupied this wide release slot for Warner Brothers, and the result was a box office bomb, too. The film grossed only around $9.6 million globally on a reported $45 to $50 million budget, and theater chains also quickly dropped it from rotation. Some called this rollout, a prestige gamble, and others called it a vanity release, and I lean towards the latter. Typically, even in the ever changing markets of today, where we don't really have cut and dry summer movie awards movie seasons, typically still you don't release your awards hopefuls until much later in the year. So I think this might have just been a vanity project that made its way into wide release for that reason alone. What remains, though, most frustrating about the Alto Knights is that it has ingredients of something better. Levinson is no stranger to intimate character studies. He's a very notable director. Pelegi, the screenwriter, understands the rhythms of gangster storytelling, and De Niro, meanwhile, is clearly very invested in this role. He's not phoning it in. And despite his age, he's still very capable of scenes that draw you in, hold your attention, and make you think afterward. The thing that I keep coming back to when I do remark upon this movie is his central performance, or pair of performances, I should say. But the film does not really trust the viewers enough not to exposit over and over and over again. And the pacing sometimes feels like a chore rather than like a tense mob thriller. There are mob movies that are quite long that still feel very tense, and you're on the edge of your seat the whole time. This is not one of them. The movie moves in fits and starts. It ends up reminding you of better mob movies rather than carving out its own reason for existing in the genre. That's really that's really the death nail. In the end, the Alto Knights, it serves as less of a late career triumph and more like a curious, interesting misfire. It's a film that fascinates in moments, particularly, like I said, in its portrait of Frank Costello and Vito Genovese. De Niro as Costello, like I said, very controlled, compelling. But the movie just fails to cohere. The dual performance is the reason to see it if you are going to see it. It's impressive, but it's not ultimately like essential. And, I get what it's doing. It's reaching for this thesis about the contrast of the two central figures in the story, but it never feels fully baked. The direction is nostalgic, but it's not very like vital. It doesn't feel very alive necessarily. And the controversy surrounding the release of the movie only further highlights this disconnect between the film's aspirations and the actual execution of the story. There's something a little tragic about watching a film that's so reverent of like legacy ultimately sink under the weight of its own ambitions. Perhaps in the end, that is a fitting metaphor, though, for the mob world that is depicted in the movie. The higher the rise, the harder the fall. So on my bespoke rating scale of A list, amazing, average, abysmal, and needs to be abolished, the Alto Knights will be receiving a probably like an average rating, a light average. If you watch it with your dad on Father's Day, for example, I think a nice time will be had by all. It's no genre classic, though. It's a light 3 stars, but in no world could I be convinced to go above that. It's an offer that the film can't refuse, frankly. Anyways, did you see the Alto Knights? What did you think of it if you did? Alternatively, what's your favorite mob movie? What's your favorite De Niro performance? Picking a favorite De Niro would be hard for me. And I always break the rules when it comes to favorite mob movie because I always just say The Sopranos, but I can't help it. The Sopranos is like amazing. I've rewatched it like 3 times in my life. Every time I'm like, this is the greatest thing ever made. I'd be curious to know your thoughts, though. Feel free to answer any and all of those questions in the comments, and I'll try to answer as many as I can. Feel free also to like this video or subscribe to the channel, or both. Until next time, don't get involved in organized crime, especially if your rival would end up being just you in prosthetic makeup. That's just plain creepy. It's just plain unsettling. Stay safe. Bye.